What if the letter that changed your life wasn't even meant for you? The morning mist wrapped the Utah mountains like a widow's veil, soft and gray against the pale sky. The year was 1884, and spring came slow to the valley. Thin snow still clung to the shadows of pine trees, stubborn against the season's warmth. The air smelled of cold earth and pine resin, fresh, lonely, and quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Thatcher Kane stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his rough hands, staring at the sun climbing over the peaks. At 40, he looked older than his years, his face lined by weather and grief, his eyes the color of worn steel. He'd lived alone for 15 years, and solitude had become as natural to him as breathing. His ranch stretched across 200 acres of rough land, not rich land, but his own. Every fence post, every wall, every inch of pasture had passed through his hands. The cattle were grazing in the lower fields, their breath turning to mist in the cold air. It was a hard life, but it kept him busy enough to forget how empty the house was. 15 years ago, Margaret's fever had taken her. And when she died, so did the laughter in his home. Since then, Thatcher hadn't so much as looked twice at a woman. The folks in Millwater 20 miles east used to tease him, but even they'd given up. "That Kane fella's as good as a monk," they'd say, shaking their heads. He finished his coffee and moved through his morning chores like a machine. Feed the horses, check the water troughs, fix the fence where the wolves had been prowling. Every motion was practiced, every minute planned. That's how he kept the loneliness quiet. But that morning, something broke the rhythm. A thin cloud of dust rose from the wagon road, far off and small, but enough to catch his eye. Visitors didn't come often, not unless they had business. He squinted against the sunlight, trying to make out the shape. Not a wagon, a person. On foot. Thatcher set down the harness he was repairing and started toward the road, boots crunching in the dirt. The figure moved unevenly, stumbling every few steps. When the wind shifted, he saw the hem of a long brown dress and the tilt of a bonnet. A woman. His heart gave a strange, uneasy thump. She was young, or maybe just younger than he expected, with hair like autumn leaves, brown and gold all at once. Her dress was caked in dust, her hands gripping a small carpet bag that looked too heavy for her thin frame. When she saw him, she stopped and swayed, one hand pressed to her chest. "Mr. Thatcher Kane." Her voice was hoarse, cracked with exhaustion. He nodded slowly, too startled to speak. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had said his name out loud. Thank the Lord. She breathed, and then her knees gave out. He ran forward, catching her before she hit the ground. She was light, frighteningly light, and burning with fever. Her face was pale beneath the dirt, her lips trembling. He half carried her to the porch and set her down in the old rocking chair Margaret used to love. His hands shook as he pumped water from the well. She drank greedily, gasping for air between sips. Then, as the color returned to her cheeks, she managed a small, tired smile. "I've come such a long way," she whispered. 3 days on the train, then the stage to Millwater. Walked since dawn. "The driver refused to go farther into the mountains." Thatcher frowned. "You came here on purpose." She nodded and reached into her carpet bag, pulling out an envelope with trembling hands. "But I'm here now. I'm Eloise Mercer, Mr. Kane, your bride." The words hit him like a kick to the chest. "My what?" Quote, "Your bride," she said again, her voice full of weary certainty. "The mail-order bride you sent for from the agency in Chicago." Thatcher stared at her, his mind blank. "There's some mistake, miss. I didn't send for any bride." Her smile faltered. "But the letter you wrote to the agency, it said you needed a wife, someone strong enough for mountain life, not afraid of hard work." She held the letter out to him, desperate now. "It's all here. Your name. Your signature." Thatcher took it, his fingers numb. And sure enough, there it was. His name at the bottom, the words written in neat, steady handwriting that wasn't his. Someone had sent for this woman in his name. "This isn't my writing," he said quietly, I never sent this. The color drained from her face, but I left everything. My job. My home. I came all this way. Her voice trembled, then steadied with painful dignity, I see. Then I've made a fool of myself. She rose unsteadily to her feet. Mr. Kane, if you could just direct me back to town. It's 20 miles, he said, glancing toward the darkening clouds gathering over the western ridge, and there's a storm coming. Then I'd best start walking. She lifted her bag, though her hands shook with the effort. You won't make it. The words came out rougher than he meant. Not in your condition, not with the weather turning. She turned on him, eyes flashing, despite her exhaustion. Then what would you have me do, Mr. Kane? Sleep in your barn. He raked a hand through his hair, frustrated with her, with the situation, with himself. You can stay the night, he said finally, just tonight. When the storm passes, I'll take you to town myself. Relief flickered in her eyes, quickly hidden behind politeness. Thank you. I'll work for my keep, of course. I'm no burden, he almost smiled. There's a small room off the kitchen. Was meant for a housekeeper once. You can rest there. As he led her inside, he noticed how the fading light caught in her hair, how her presence seemed to stir the air itself. The house felt smaller, warmer, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. And it unsettled him deeply. He told himself she was just a traveler, a stranger passing through. But as he watched her sink onto the narrow bed with a sigh of relief, Thatcher Kane felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Something dangerous, something hopeful, something like life returning to a heart that had been silent too long. And outside, the storm began to roll in. The storm didn't pass by morning. It settled over the valley like a heavy quilt, turning the road to mud and the air to mist. Rain tapped the windows, steady and cold. Inside the ranch house, the smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the quiet rooms. Thatcher stood at the window, mug in hand, watching the rain pour in gray sheets. He could hear movement in the kitchen, soft, careful sounds. The scrape of a chair, the faint clink of crockery. Eloise Mercer was up early. When she spoke, her voice came from behind him. I can try walking if you need me gone. He didn't turn around. You'd never make it 10 miles in this weather. Then I'll stay and work. I don't take charity. That stubbornness made something twist in his chest. Irritation, maybe admiration. He finally turned. She'd pinned up her copper hair and tied an apron around her waist. Her sleeves were rolled, her cheeks flushed from the stove's heat. I'll not be idle while you feed me, she added. He nodded once. Suit yourself. She smiled faintly. I usually do. All day the rain fell, and all day she worked. Thatcher found her scrubbing floors, cleaning windows that hadn't been touched in years, sorting shelves in the pantry. She hummed while she worked. Quiet, tuneless, but steady. The sound filled the silences that used to weigh on the house like ghosts. He tried not to notice. Tried to lose himself in his chores, but every time he came back inside, there she was, changing things, softening them. By evening, the storm grew wild again. Thunder rolled through the valley, shaking the windows. Lightning lit the mountains in fierce white flashes. Eloise had made supper, beef stew, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Thatcher stood awkwardly in the doorway as she ladled stew into bowls. One used your supplies, she said without looking up. I hope that's all right. He nodded, then sat across from her. They ate in silence, the storm roaring outside, the fire crackling between them. Her hands were small but steady. She ate slowly, with a quiet grace that made him remember things he thought he'd forgotten. Conversation, warmth, company. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly. After supper, she insisted on washing the dishes. He tried to read an old newspaper but found himself watching her instead. The lamplight caught the loose strands of her hair, and for a moment he forgot where he was. When she finally turned toward him, drying her hands, she said softly, Thank you, Mr. Kane, for the shelter. For the kindness. It's not kindness, he said, rougher than intended. It's just decency. She smiled a little. No, it's more than that. Most men would have sent me back into the storm. He didn't answer. She gave him a small nod and disappeared into her room. Thatcher sat staring at the fire long after she'd gone. The house felt warmer, alive, and it scared him more than any storm ever could. The next day, the storm still hadn't lifted. The rain had turned to sleet. Thatcher worked in the barn, pretending the cold wind didn't cut through him. When he came inside, dripping and chilled, he found Eloise at the table, reading the letter again, the one that had brought her here. "I've been thinking about this," she said. "This paper came from the Millwater General Store. See the watermark." He looked closer and frowned. She was right. Someone local wrote it. Quote, "Someone who knows you," she said quietly, "knows enough to forge your name, to describe this place, to know you've been alone too long." He stiffened. "Who would do that?" "Maybe someone who thought you needed saving," she said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Nobody cares that much." "Don't be so sure," she murmured. "Kindness takes strange forms sometimes." He didn't want to talk about it anymore. He pulled on his coat and went back outside, but her words followed him through the rain. That night, the thunder was louder than ever. Lightning struck somewhere near the ridge, close enough to make the horses whinny in fear. Thatcher grabbed his lantern and went to check on them. When he came back in, soaked to the bone, Eloise was waiting by the fire, eyes wide with worry. "I thought something happened," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm fine," he said, just checking the stock. "Do you do that every storm? Every time there's something worth protecting?" She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "Then you understand me." They sat together by the fire, silent at first. The storm raged outside, but inside it was warm, safe. Eloise stared into the flames, her face soft and thoughtful. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. He didn't pretend not to know who she meant, Margaret. "Yes," he hesitated, then sighed. "She was light, laughed at everything. She made this place feel like home. We were married 3 years before the fever took her. I was in town when she fell sick. By the time I came back, she was gone." Eloise said nothing, just moved her chair closer. Not touching, just near enough that he could feel her warmth. "My parents died 3 years ago," she said quietly. "After a while I had no one. Ended up working in a boarding house. It wasn't a kind place. The owner thought the girls were part of the furniture. That's why I ran. The mail-order bride ad seemed like hope." Thatcher felt his fists tighten. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in ways that show," she whispered. "But yes, enough to make me cross the country for a stranger." "You're safe here," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She looked at him then, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I believe you." They sat there for a long time, saying nothing. The storm outside slowly softened, and the sound of rain became gentle, steady, almost soothing. Eloise finally stood. "It's late," she said softly. "Good night, mister." Kane, he watched her disappear into her room, her shadow flickering against the wall. He wanted to call her back, to say something, anything, but his voice wouldn't come. When the door closed, Thatcher leaned back in his chair, staring into the dying fire. He could hear her faint movements beyond the wall, the rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed, and for the first time in 15 years, the silence of his house didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting for something he didn't yet understand, but could no longer deny. The storm cleared by dawn, leaving the valley washed clean and shining beneath the early sun. Birds sang again, and the air smelled of wet pine and new beginnings. But inside the ranch house, Thatcher Kane's world felt more uncertain than ever. It had been 2 weeks since Eloise Mercer arrived by mistake. 2 weeks of unexpected company, shared meals, quiet laughter, and a strange new warmth that filled every corner of his home. He told himself it was temporary, that she would leave once the road dried and he took her back to town. But every morning, when he saw her moving about the kitchen, humming softly as the coffee brewed, that promise felt harder to keep. Eloise had brought life back into his world, and that frightened him more than solitude ever had. That morning he saddled the wagon, roads clear. He said, "I'll drive you into Millwater today." Eloise froze, her hands still on the coffee pot. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she turned, her face calm, but her voice trembling slightly. "If that's what you want, it's what makes sense," he said, though his throat tightened around the words. "You've done more than enough here. And yet it sounds like you're the one trying to convince yourself," she said softly. He didn't answer. Couldn't. So she packed her carpetbag and followed him to the wagon without another word. The air between them felt heavy, full of things left unsaid. The ride down the mountain was quiet except for the creak of wheels and the clop of hooves. The valley stretched green and alive around them, but Thatcher barely saw it. His mind was a storm all its own. When the town came into view, Eloise broke the silence. "What will you tell people about me?" "The truth. He said that you came because of a mistake." She nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "And will you tell them I stayed?" He turned sharply toward her. "You're not staying." Quote, "Aren't I?" she asked. "Because it seems to me, Mr. Kane, you've already made a place for me in that house, whether you meant to or not." Before he could reply, a familiar figure stepped out from the general store. Jake Monroe, Thatcher's oldest friend. Jake's eyes widened when he saw them together. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "It worked." "What worked?" Thatcher demanded. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "The letter, of course, the one that brought her here." Thatcher stared. "You wrote that Jake sighed. You weren't going to do anything for yourself, Thatcher. 15 years up there, talking to cows more than people. I figured if you wouldn't come back to life on your own, maybe a good woman could help." Thatcher's jaw tightened. "You had no right." "Maybe not," Jake said, "but I had a friend wasting away, and I'd do it again if it meant seeing this." He gestured between Thatcher and Eloise. "You look more alive than you have in years." Eloise spoke softly, her voice steady. "It was wrong, what you did, but I can't say I regret coming here." Jake smiled. "Then maybe Providence knows better than pride does." Thatcher wanted to stay angry, but he couldn't. Not when Eloise stood beside him, her eyes full of quiet strength. Not when he realized that Jake, for all his meddling, had given him something he didn't know he needed, a second chance. They spent the rest of the day in town, buying supplies, listening to whispers that followed them wherever they went. People stared at the strange pair, the lonely rancher and the mail-order bride who came by mistake. Thatcher ignored them, but Eloise held her head high. When they were finally back in the wagon, headed home, he said quietly, "You didn't have to defend me back there." "I wasn't defending you," she said with a small smile. "I was defending us." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him shifted like ice cracking on a river. That night, the air was cool and still. The lamp cast a soft glow over the parlor. Eloise sat by the fire, sewing a tear in one of his shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders. Thatcher watched her for a long moment, heart pounding in his chest. "You don't have to go back to town," he said finally. She looked up, startled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this house is different with you in it. I'm different. For 15 years I thought I'd buried my heart with Margaret. But you came here and proved I was wrong. You reminded me that living isn't the same as being alive." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't move Thatcher. He took a step closer. "I don't know if you can forgive the way you were brought here. I don't know if you can love a man who forgot how. But I can't imagine this house without you now. Not after you've filled it with light again." Eloise set her sewing aside and stood, facing him fully. "And if I stayed, what then?" "Then I'd spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you," he said. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then she took his hand. "I think you already do." He kissed her then, slow, hesitant, reverent, as the fire crackled low. When they parted, she smiled through her tears. "It seems your friend's mistake wasn't a mistake after all." Months later, the ranch looked different. Curtains fluttered in the windows. Flowers grew by the porch. And inside, laughter filled the rooms again. Eloise worked the garden while Thatcher mended a fence. When he came to her side, she was glowing in the sunlight, one hand resting on her growing belly. "You shouldn't be working so hard," he said, pretending to scold. "I'm fine." she laughed. "You've forgotten. I'm stronger than I look." He smiled, kissing her hand. I'll never forget that their marriage had been simple, held in the same church where Thatcher had once said goodbye to Margaret. Jake stood as best man, proud and teary-eyed. And when the preacher declared them husband and wife, Thatcher felt something inside him finally heal. As the years passed, the story of the lonely rancher and the mistaken bride became a quiet legend in Millwater, the tale of two broken souls who found love not through planning or promises, but through grace, chance, and courage. Every night as the sun dipped behind the Utah mountains, Thatcher would sit beside his wife on the porch, their daughter asleep inside, and think about the letter that started it all. A letter meant to deceive had instead delivered salvation. He'd whisper to Eloise, half in awe, "Funny thing, isn't it? How mistakes can save a man's life." And she'd smile that same gentle smile that had changed everything. "Some mistakes," she'd say, "are really just miracles in disguise." Quote, and in the quiet light of the Wild West evening, with love in his home and laughter in his heart, Thatcher Kane finally knew he'd been found by the woman who'd arrived by mistake and stayed by choice.